Catholicism was at that time and how it shifted now. You can meet Catholics now and nothing about them speaks of repression or inhibition or concern at all. It all seems to have gone.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe they backtracked on all that kind of thing. But it was so cruel at telling us that we were nothing. And now apparently they've ditched purgatory, haven't they, and limbo and hell.
And there's hardly any confession.
Well, no. I said to a priest the other day I met, and I said from a distance, because going near them fills me with revulsion. I said to him, "Do you actually believe in the resurrection of the body?" And I must say, to give him credit, he kind of looked around like old comics used to do, and he said, "Well, Tom," he said, "I think the jury's still out on that." You bet it's still out. Yeah.
And what about, I was going to ask you about, so we talked about that monastery, which was the idea of getting rid of the self. How long were you there?
Well, nearly 6 years.
Nearly 6 years, that's a long
By that time, of course, I had made the leap from a genocide, to chastity, and embraced the suffering that brings. And really embraced the whole idea. It was an alternative. It was an alternative existence, wasn't it? You see, there in the monastery, you didn't need to be clever. All you needed is to actually be abject, to have no views at all. And that wonderful trick, they say, listen, when your superiors give you an order, it is God speaking. So no matter how stupid it is, how patently stupid it is, God is testing you. Now, that's a marvelous alibi, isn't it, for treating people badly, We weren't, of course, allowed, when I was in my novitiate, we weren't even allowed to look at each other. And so, when we were in the chapel, the only sight you had of anyone was the curve in the back of their neck. I remember a very pretty boy in front of me called Olivier Jean. And I used to have this terrific desire, to stroke the back of his neck. I didn't know what the front of his head looked like because we weren't allowed to look at him, And we were all ejaculating in the religious sense all day long. People were crying out, blurting out things like, "God be praised," or "Think of St. Stanislaus." That was a good one, yes. And so sometimes I'd say, think of St. Wilberforce or something like that. They didn't seem to notice that either.
But when you think now, can you imagine the sort of self that you had that believed all that? Because also when you look back, you were talking about your mother. I mean, she believed it absolutely, didn't she? Right the way through to the end of her life. It informed her existence.
Yes. My wonderful mother said an extraordinary thing that I can recall quite clearly that I overheard as a child talking to her sister. She said, "Louis, thank God we're poor." And Louis said, "How do you mean, Jane?" She said, "Well, Father Sharkey's been in, and he was saying, 'Blessed are the poor, for they shall see God,' Mrs. Baker." And that consoled my mother, it's absolutely wonderful. It's the great paradoxes of Christianity, that's all I know about, the marvelous paradoxes. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And as Mark Twain said, and it'll be interesting to see how long they hold on to it. It's a way of making poor, ignorant people cope with their misery, isn't it? And then to be giving 2 shillings a week to the church amounted, in my view, when I look back on it, to protection money. A man in black used to knock at the door, and my mother would reach by the clock where there'd be a 2 shilling piece to pay off the priest, who knew how poor we were, But this man could forgive our sins. So my whole... In the tumult of my imagination, death was very imminent all the time. I was nothing. I was abject. And that the end of the world was a desirable state, and heaven existed. And then, of course, was the absence of privacy, because if you're a Christian, there's no such thing as privacy, since God is everywhere. So, and then you've got your guardian angel on your left shoulder. So, going for a good, stiff, Rabelaisian bowel movement made you very, very tense, because there were 2 big, important people there. You couldn't see them, but you believed in them. When I was a novice in my monastery, we all put on linen gowns in order to have communal showers. And of course, as you can imagine, with the water coming from the ceiling and the side like that, hot water, and there's some sweaty old monk there scalding the young men that we were, or freezing us at his pleasure. But, the bodies of young men in linen shifts probably look quite good to certain repressed
I
people.
mean, because you feel quite. I think you feel quite aggressive now towards religion, don't you?
Yeah, I
mean,
do.
Because
Very.
perhaps for what it did to your mother, or perhaps all the people who bought into it.
We swallowed all that guff, you know, which finally a lot of it has been ditched. Apparently, I don't know. But you know, when I watch all those cardinals all dressed up and think that I want to put frocks on like that, and why doesn't someone notice that the Pope looks like Uncle Fester? You know, and this whole idea, and so you see, I prefer the American system, at least. You know, I mean, most of what I look at television is only so that I can jeer and mock at it and shout and annoy my wife about it, who's a wonderful woman and puts up with me. But you know, they would talk all the time as if they knew things, and we know that they don't know things. They don't know anything. And so but at least in America, it's very theatrical. And you buy into this confidence trick, you know, the more eloquent they are, you buy into it. But we don't have that, do we? I mean, religion on English television or on the radio, I think they said, dear God, terrible.
You said before that, I think you said something about not being, did you say not much of an actor or something like that? I mean, it was an odd expression, as though you were critical of yourself when you were an actor.
I don't know about critical of myself. The thing is, I've always been some sort of a performer, which led me to be an altar boy, you know, and carry crosses and dress up in funny things. And of course, I love the thick, stupefying smell of incense. You know, I mean, I was high on incense, if one can be, inhaling incense, you know, and going to funerals, and then realizing, quite by accident, I used to sometimes go to 3 funerals a day. You know, I mean, life was much more interesting and passionate in the days before penicillin. You know, one good dose of flu would see all the old women off in the street. You know, a nail in your shoe on a Saturday night dance, you'd be dead by the following Thursday. Septicemia, big leg. And so I used to go to a lot of funerals, and I liked going to funerals. I was unauthorable, so at least I could sniff the incense. Anyway. One day when I'd been to 3 funerals and was very hungry because you couldn't eat before you went to the mass. I must have been weeping with the cold. It was terrible, absolutely terrible. And at the end of this little burial, a man took my hand, which rather scared me a bit, and slipped into my hand a warm coin. When I got back into the sacristy, I realized it was a 2-shilling piece or a half crown or something. And I was corrupted instantly when I realized he thought that I was weeping because I was sorry, you know, that his mother had died or something. And he, being sentimental, gave me the money. And when I realized that, and the other tossers, these other boys, you know, probably went to grammar school for all I know, they were doing it absolutely straight while I was sobbing like a good one, you know, and they were getting threepenny bits while I was getting half crowns. So it was a kind of power, you know, just a performer, really.
But sometimes, is it because you are? I mean, you're a very literate person. You know, you read a lot. I mean, you love American novelists, whether it's Bellow or Roth or Updike, and you constantly. I mean, is there a sense in which you perhaps? I mean, you could have been a writer. I mean, I've said your autobiography is brilliantly written. It's such a readable piece. But you've not thought about writing. I mean, presumably on Doctor Who, you were often writing your own lines. It sounded as though you were writing your